There is a teaching, very old and very gentle, that says a person who learns to be grateful receives a second life. Not a longer life, not an easier life. A second life, brighter, wider, softer than the first, lived inside the very same days. Think of two people walking the same road in the same light. One of them sees the road as a list of what is missing, the distance still to travel, the cold that will come, the dust on the boots, the hours that are slipping away. The other sees the same road and notices the warmth of the sun on the shoulders, the green at the edges of the path, the bread in the pocket, the sound of the wind moving through the wheat. Same road, same light, two different lives. Most of the suffering of the heart is not in the road. It is in the habit of seeing only what is missing. Tonight, we are going to speak about the oldest medicine for that habit. A medicine older than the monasteries, older than the languages those teachings were written in, as old as the first human being who looked at the sky and felt, against all evidence of his hunger and his trouble, that he had been given more than he deserved. Gratitude, not the thin, polite kind, the word you say at a table because it was expected. The deep kind, the kind that changes the blood, the kind that teaches the heart to count what remains instead of what was lost. The Buddha did not teach that you should ignore your troubles and smile. He taught something far more interesting, that the mind can be trained to see. And what the mind is trained to see, the heart is changed by. A grateful heart is not a heart that has more. It is a heart that has learned to notice. And what is noticed is almost always enough. Tonight you will hear 4 old stories. They come from different villages, different centuries, different teachers. But they are all the same story, told 4 times. The story of a person who had very little, who looked at their life with new eyes, and who found, in that looking, more abundance than the wealthy could imagine. There is nothing for you to do while you listen. No test, no exercise. There is only a voice and old stories and the quiet between the words, where a small and tired heart can learn, slowly, to open. Tonight, we sit with a question that is softer than it sounds. What would it be like to live as if you had already been given enough? Not because you will have everything, but because the eye that sees what is already there carries a lamp the hungry eye can never hold. It is a story about a woodcutter and a treasure and the strange and luminous discovery he made on the day he found it. There is an old story, told in many lands and many tongues, about a woodcutter who lived at the edge of a forest where the light came late and the cold came early. His name, in most tellings, is simply the woodcutter. He was not a young man, and he was not an old man. He was the age when a life settles into its shape, and the shape his life had taken was one of quiet, constant toil. Every morning before the sun, he walked into the forest with his axe. Every evening, he came back bent under the weight of the day's wood, sold what he could, kept what he needed, and lay down on a narrow bed in a small hut with a leak in the roof that he had been meaning to mend for 11 years. He did not think of himself as poor, exactly. He thought of himself as tired. There is a difference. The poor man notices what he lacks. The tired man simply stops noticing anything at all. And that was the woodcutter's true poverty, not the missing coins, but the missing eyes. He had looked at his own life so long without seeing it that the life itself had become invisible to him. Then, one afternoon, the forest changed. He was deep in the part of the woods where the trees grew close and the ground was thick with the smell of wet earth. He had stopped to rest against a fallen trunk. The day was warm. The work had been heavy, and his back was talking to him the way old backs do. And as he leaned there, wiping his face with his sleeve, the heel of his hand pressed into the soft ground beside him, and it touched something hard. At first he thought it was a root. He scraped at it with his fingers, expecting wood. But it was not wood. It was the dull gleam of metal, worked by human hands, half swallowed by the earth. He dug. The thing emerged slowly, like something rising out of a dream. A small box, iron, rusted, sealed. It took the rest of the afternoon to work it free, and by the time the light was going orange through the trees, he had it open, and he was looking at a treasure. Coins. Enough coins, it seemed to him, and he had never counted more than a few at a time in his whole life, to buy the iron roof, and the mended fence, and a year of mornings without the axe. Enough, whispered something in his chest, to never walk into the cold again. The woodcutter sat in the forest with the open box in his lap, and the light failed, and the owls began, and still he sat, not with the treasure, but with the feeling the treasure had opened in him. He was not thinking of spending it. That was the strange thing. He was thinking of the 11 years of roof, and the mornings, and the weight on his back, and how he had carried it all without ever once mentioning it to anyone. Because who would listen to a woodcutter complain about a life he had chosen and could not change? And as he sat there, a great, quiet wave moved through him, not of money, but of gratitude. Not for the coins. He hardly thought of the coins as his. For the life. For the forest that had held him 40 years and never once failed to give him wood. For the hut that had kept out the rain, even through the hole in the roof. For his 2 hands, calloused and crooked and still strong, which had fed him every single day of his adult life and had never once asked for thanks. He did not think of it in those words, exactly. He was a simple man, and his gratitude rose in him the way water rises, wordless, patient, unstoppable. But it moved in him, and it was real, and it was, in its way, the first time in 40 years that the woodcutter had looked at his own life and found it not a burden but a gift. Now, the story could end here, with the woodcutter wealthy and the villagers amazed. But the old tellings keep a different ending, and the different ending is the whole point. The woodcutter took the box. He carried it home through the dark, and he set it on the table in the small, smoky room, and he sat down across from it, the way you sit across from a thing you do not understand. And he thought, for a long time, about what it would mean to keep it. He had earned nothing that day beyond his usual wages. He had found a thing that belonged to no one, or to the forest, which, in the woodcutter's reckoning, was the same as belonging to everyone. And something old and strong inside him, something that had been made by 40 years of taking only what the wood gave, and giving back what he could, spoke up in the quiet of the room. I have lived with what I have, he thought, and I have not been unhappy. I was tired, but tired is not the same as empty. Every evening I have been fed. Every winter I have been warm enough. Every morning the forest has been there, waiting for me, the way it was today and the day before and the day before that. And I never once said thank you. He looked at the coins. And the coins, which had seemed so bright in the failing forest light, looked different now in the lamplight of his honest room. They did not shine less. They shone differently. They shone like a question looking for a borrower. The story says the woodcutter closed the box and carried it, the next morning, to the village, where he told the elders of the town what he had found. And there, in the open square, standing in the gap between his 2 worn boots, he said the words that have carried this story across the centuries. I found this in the forest. It is not mine. It was never mine. It belongs to the forest, and to the town, and to the hands that need it more than I do. And there is one thing I ask in return, which is the only thing I want. Let me keep the mornings. The elders stared at him. Men have sold their brothers for less than he was holding. And one of them, the oldest, a man so old the town had forgotten he had ever been young, looked at the woodcutter for a long time and said, "You have given away more than the coins. You have given away the need for them. And a man who no longer needs what the world hoards is a man the world cannot touch." So the treasure went to those who needed it, to the widow whose roof was gone, to the family whose harvest had failed, to the child whose fever had emptied the house of everything but hope. And the woodcutter went back to the forest the next morning, as he had gone every morning of his adult life, with his axe on his shoulder and the first light of the day on his face. But he was not the same man, because from that day forward, the woodcutter taught his own eyes a new discipline, and it is the discipline at the heart of this story. Every morning, on the path into the forest, he stopped at the top of the rise where the trees opened and the whole valley lay below him in the low golden light, and he said, out loud, to the day, in a voice no one would hear but the day itself, "Thank you for the forest. Thank you for my hands. Thank you for the fire that will wait for me tonight." He said it every morning, in the rain, in the frost. On the mornings his back ached and the wood was heavy and the walk was long. And this is the strange thing the story tells us, and it is the whole of the teaching. Nothing in his life changed. The roof still leaked for a while. The work was still hard. The coins were gone and did not come back. But the woodcutter changed. And the man who had been too tired to notice his own life became a man who walked through each day carrying it like a lamp. The neighbors, who had watched him give away a fortune, expected him to be poorer for it. Instead, over the years, they noticed something they could not explain. The woodcutter smiled more than any man with his roof, and his axe had a right to. He was slower at other people's funerals and kinder at their tables. He gave, and it did not diminish him. And grown men said of him, in the village, with a kind of wonder, "He has nothing, and he is wealthier than the king." Now let us sit with this old story, because it is not about a box in the ground, and it is not about a woodcutter who lived in a village that the wind has long since taken. It is about you. Most of you listening have a treasure in the ground, and it is not coins. It is the whole ordinary life you are carrying, and you have been so busy working at its edges, so tired from its weight, so convinced of what it lacks, that you have never once stopped to notice what it already holds. When did you last say thank you for the morning you were given? Not for the big things, the promotions, the recoveries, the answered prayers. For the small things. For the roof, whatever it is. For the hands, whatever they can do. For the food, however plain. For the person who is still in your life, however imperfectly. For the fact that you are here, in this quiet room, with a voice speaking softly to you and a heart that is still, against all odds, beating. The woodcutter did not find his wealth in the box. He found it in the day he stopped measuring what his life lacked and started seeing what it held. And the ancient teaching of the gratitude tradition is exactly this. Abundance is not a quantity. It is a way of seeing. A poor man with grateful eyes is rich in a way no treasury can match, because his wealth cannot be taken. And a rich man with measuring eyes is poor, because his eyes will always find another thing he does not have. The treasure in the box is still lying in the forest somewhere. It was always less valuable than the treasure the woodcutter found that afternoon in the failing light, the discovery that he had a life worth thanking. Let that discovery happen to you tonight. Not by force, not by a long list of blessings you recite and do not feel. Simply by this, one small, honest notice. Look at the room around you, however plain, however cold. Look at the blanket, the chair, the still air. Look at your own body, whatever it has carried, whatever it has lost, and notice, just for one moment, that it is still here, holding you. And say, in your own heart, in your own voice, the first and oldest of human prayers, thank you for this one thing, for this ordinary, irreplaceable, still present now. The woodcutter would not have recognized the word abundance. He would have been surprised to learn he had any. But he had learned, in the oldest room of his heart, the thing that this story has come to teach, that the eye that gives thanks is given more, not in things, but in seeing. and seeing is the only treasure that cannot be lost. There is another old story, softer than the first, about a king and a simple man, and a gift so small that every court in the story laughed at it. And because they laughed, they missed what it was worth. The king in the story, in most tellings, is simply the king. He was a generous man, the tellings say, which is a rare and complicated thing to be. He gave to the temples. He gave to the poor at the gates. He gave to the scholars, the widows, the musicians, and the soldiers who guarded the mountain passes. His generosity was famous throughout the kingdom, and the people loved him for it. And the old wise men of the court said of him what the old wise men say of generous kings: his hands are never empty. But there is a corner of every life that the public hand never reaches, and the king had such a corner. He could give. Anyone could see it. What the king could not do, what he had never in his life learned to do, was receive. Think about it the way the story thinks about it. The king had been raised to be the giver. From the first lessons of his childhood, he had been taught that a king's dignity is in what he offers, not in what he takes. The tribute he accepted was on behalf of the kingdom, not himself. The gifts at his coronation were ceremonies, moments to be survived and acknowledged. He had learned, deeply, in the oldest part of himself, that to receive is to owe, and to owe is to be small, and a king cannot be small. So when the king gave, he felt the warmth of his own generosity, the glow of the giver, the pleasure of the open hand. But when a gift came to him, even a small one, even a loving one, something in him closed. He did not know how to take it. He accepted it with grace, as he had been trained to, and then he returned it, doubled, tripled, 10 times over, as if to wipe out the debt of having received anything at all. Receiving felt, to the king, like a door left open. Giving felt like a door firmly closed. And a life lived only through closed doors, the old teachers knew, is a life that never learns the true shape of its own walls. The story begins on a day of state, when the king was making a progress through the provinces, riding through the harvest towns with his court, his banners, and his long shadow of obligation. And in one of the towns, at the edge of the road, pressed among the crowd of onlookers, stood a man who held in his hands a single, simple thing, a cup. Not a golden cup, not a jeweled cup, not the kind of gift a king receives. A wooden cup, plain, worn, turned on a wheel by the man's own hands a few nights before. It was nicely made. You could see that, smooth and round and grained with the honest pattern of the wood. But it was, unmistakably, the gift of a poor man, which is to say, the only gift a poor man had. And when the king's horse drew near, the man stepped forward past the guards, which nearly got him killed. The guards reached for their spears, and he knelt in the road and held up the wooden cup with both hands and said, in a voice that carried through the crowd, "Great king, I have nothing of value. I am a woodturner, and this cup is the best thing my hands have ever made. Please, take it. It is all I have, and it is yours." The court laughed. You can hear it still in the old tellings. The courtiers' laughter, polished and brief, the way courts laugh at the unpolished things of the world. A wooden cup for the king. What would the king do with a wooden cup? Where would he put it? The throne room was made for silver. The king looked at the cup. And here the story turns, because the king did not see what the court saw. He saw a man kneeling in the dust of the road, holding out the one thing his 2 hands had made, offering it to a king who had everything, offering it the only way the woodturner knew how to offer anything, which was everything he had. And the king felt something he had not felt in years. He felt the weight of receiving. He reached down. He took the cup. The guards relaxed. The crowd leaned in to watch, because everyone had seen a king. Accept tributes 10,000 times the size of this one, But nobody had ever seen this particular king take a wooden cup and turn it over slowly in his hands, looking at it the way you look at a thing you want to understand. "I will keep this cup," the king said, "and I will drink from it tonight and every night, not because it is the finest thing in my house, but because it is the first thing in a long time that no one had to give me." The street fell silent. The woodturner did not know whether he had been honored or mocked, and he stood there, trembling, holding his breath. And the king, still looking at the cup, asked him a question that none of the courtiers understood. "Tell me, my friend, when you made this, what were you thinking?" The woodturner swallowed. The question took him all the way back to the nights at his wheel. The candle, the shavings curling off the blade, the town asleep, and the quiet rhythm of his own hands doing the oldest thing human hands do, making from the world something that had not been there before. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that the king drinks from silver, and the king is a good king, and a good king has every fine thing. But every fine thing comes from somewhere, and the men who make the fine things, who turn the wood and hammer the metal and bend the light, we never see the king drink. So I made a cup, and I put into it, as well as I could, the wish that the king would be happy. And I thought, this is the only cup I can give him from my own two hands. And I hoped, with all my heart, that it would at least hold his attention for a moment, the way the road held him today." The king sat very still on his horse, and those listening say that the king's eyes, which had seen 1,000 towns and 1,000 tributes, filled with something rare. Because the king understood, in that moment, a thing he had spent his whole life not understanding. The whole court had given him gold their ancestors had mined. The whole kingdom had paid him taxes the law had demanded, and all of it, in the deep accounting of the heart, was owed, given because he was the king, because the crown required it, because the harvest had come in and the tribute was due. But this wooden cup had been given by no one in the kingdom but one man, given out of his poverty, out of his labor, out of what he could make with his own two tired hands and his own good heart, and no law in the land could have forced it from him, because the law had never heard of this cup and would not have known what to do with it if it had. No one in the kingdom was richer than this cup, the king said, and he said it to himself, quietly, under the eyes of the court. Then he looked at the woodturner and spoke the words that this story has carried across the centuries. "I have spent my life learning to give. Tonight I must learn what you have just taught me, how to receive. You have given me more than a cup, my friend. You have given me the chance to be small, in a life where I have always had to be large. And I have discovered, in this moment, that the door I kept closed all my life, the door through which gifts enter, is the same door through which love enters. And I have kept it locked so long that I had forgotten there was anything on the other side worth seeing." The king did not double the man's gift. He did not hand back a purse of gold to wash out the debt. He did what no one at court had ever seen him do. He kept the cup, kept it plain and wooden and ungilded, and he drank from it that night, and every night, for the rest of his life, in the quiet of his own room, where no one could see and no one could collect what was owed. And the story says that after that day, the king began to change in small ways the court could measure but not explain. He accepted the gifts of the people, the bread of the bakers, the cloth of the weavers, the hard green apples from the orchard children, with the same careful, wondering attention he had given the wooden cup. He stopped returning everything doubled, as if to wipe the ledger clean of having received. He let himself owe, for once, the small and lovely debts of a man, not a king. And his kingdom, the tellings say, became gentler in the years that followed, because the king who had spent his life giving what he thought others wanted finally learned to receive what they had freely offered, and the two directions of the human heart, when both are open, make a road that the whole of a life can travel. Now let this story sit with you, because it is about the gifts you have been unable to receive. You are probably a generous person. You can see it in your habits, the helping hand, the listening ear, the money given, the favors done, the way you take care of everyone around you and wave away the thanks. And all of that is good. But the old teachers of this tradition knew a secret that the world forgets. The givers of the world are often the worst receivers. Somewhere in your childhood, you may have learned the same lesson the king learned, that it is better to give than to receive, that to need is weak and to be needed is strong, that a gift you accept puts you in someone's debt, and the safest position is to own nothing and to hand everything back, doubled, so that no one can ever say you took. And so you have gone through life giving and closing the door on the receiving. You take the compliment and deflect it. You take the help and immediately repay it, so that no debt remains. You take the care of others and feel, beneath the surface, a little uneasy, a little unworthy, a little sure that you must somehow earn the love that is placed in your hands. But look what the king discovered in the road with a wooden cup in his hands, in the pouring light of that ordinary street. To receive is not to be weak. It is to be the other half of the gift. A gift that is held out and taken is complete. A gift that is held out and refused, even kindly refused, even doubled back, is a door that closes on the hands that opened. The next time someone offers you something, a word of kindness, a plate of food, a small helping hand, a moment of their attention, try this tiny act of the gratitude teaching. Take it fully, without the reflex to repay it in the same breath. Let it sit in your hands for a moment, the way the king let the wooden cup sit in his, and say, simply and honestly, "Thank you. I receive this, not because you deserve it. You do not have to deserve a gift to receive it. That is, in fact, the entire meaning of a gift, that it is not earned. It is given. And a heart that can accept what it did not earn is a heart that has finally believed the oldest and most radical claim of the gratitude tradition, that you do not have to be worthy. You only have to be willing. And the world, in its patient way, has been holding out gifts to you your whole life, waiting for you to take one. The woodturner knelt in the road and gave the king the best thing his hands had ever made. And the king, who thought he knew everything about giving, discovered that day the thing he knew nothing about, that to receive is to let the world in. And the world, once it is let in, arrives with an abundance the closed heart can never measure, because the closed heart can only count what it holds, while the open heart can finally count what it is given. Receive tonight. That is the whole teaching of this story. Give what you can, of course, but grow one hand wider, the hand that takes, and let the abundance of the world begin, at last, to reach you. There is a third story, and it is the gentlest of the four, and it is about a monk, a flower, and the quiet arithmetic of gratitude that the world has never learned to count correctly. The monk in the story is not important. The monastery is not important. What is important is that the story takes hold of a question that every human heart has asked in its quiet hours, and it answers it with a single flower. The question is this: does my small act matter? Not the great act, not the heroic gift, the grand sacrifice, the thing that changes the course of a life. The small act, the small, ordinary, almost invisible act of kindness. The flower placed somewhere when no one is looking, the words said gently when no one is listening, the handful of rice slipped to a stranger when no one is counting. Does it matter? In a world as large and as indifferent as the sky, does the small gift, the small gratitude, the single flower amount to anything? The story says, bring the question, and the flower will answer. It begins in a monastery, high on a hill, in a country of long summers and cold, clear nights, where a young monk served an old master. The young monk was devoted, as the young are devoted, completely, and with a hunger to be counted. He wanted to do something great. He wanted to give something so large that the world would feel it. And he was deeply, secretly troubled, because every time he looked at his own life, he saw only small things, the sweeping, the carrying, the 100 little gifts of a monastery, all of them so small that no one could possibly count them, and many of them so invisible that no one but God would know they had been given at all. One afternoon, the young monk confessed this trouble to the old master. They were walking in the garden of the monastery, among the herbs and the stones and the long afternoon light, and the young monk said, "Master, I give every day. I give my work and my service and my silence. And yet I look at my hands and I see nothing, nothing that will last, nothing that will be remembered, nothing large enough to matter. The great donors give their gold, and the gold glitters in the accounts of the monastery. The great teachers give their words, and the words are carried across the world. But I give only my smallness. And my smallness, Master, is swallowed by the day before the day is over. Why should I go on giving what amounts to nothing?" The old master did not answer at once. He walked a little further, slowly, the way old men walk when they are listening to something deeper than the conversation. And then he stopped, and he bent down, slowly, with his hand on his knee, and he picked, from the edge of the garden path, a single flower. It was not a grand flower. It was the ordinary kind of flower that grows at the edge of every path in every country. Pale, small, unremarkable. The master held it out to the young monk, and he said, "Take this flower. And tonight, when the monastery is quiet and everyone has gone to sleep, I want you to go into the temple, and I want you to place this flower on the great stone altar." The young monk looked at the flower. It was small. The altar was vast. The offering seemed to him almost an insult. One flower, one pale breath of a weed, on an altar built for the great gifts of kings. But he took the flower. And when the monastery was quiet, and the night had grown dark and still, the young monk went alone into the temple, and he climbed the steps of the great altar, and he placed the single flower upon it, in the center, where the great golden offerings had stood. And then he knelt there, and he looked at the flower, small and pale in the candlelight, alone on the great stone, and he waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. The candle burned. The flower sat. The night was still. The young monk watched for a long time, and then, disappointed, he returned to his room. But the story does not end there. Because when the young monk knelt down to his own heart that night, he discovered something the day's disappointment had hidden from him. He had carried the flower up the steps of the great altar with 2 hands, and on the way, he had noticed, for the first time, the small details of the temple floor that the years and his own feet had worn smooth. He had passed the places where past monks had knelt, worn hollow by 1,000 small devotions, each one so small it would never be counted, and yet, together, their smallness had worn the stone. He had climbed past the offering bowls where the faithful left their few coins and their cooked rice, and he had thought, for the first time, about the hands that carried them, the farmer's hands, the widow's hands, the hands of the villagers who gave what they had, which was never gold, and was almost always just enough. And he understood, kneeling in the quiet of the temple in the middle of the night, what the old master had been teaching him with a single flower. Smallness, the young monk understood, is not nothing. Smallness is the shape of almost all human giving. The great gifts glitter in the accounts, but the world is carried. The temples are carried. The winters are carried. The hungry are carried by the small gifts given by small hands in the small and unrecorded hours. The stone is worn by the small footsteps. The heart is kept warm by the small kindnesses. And the flower, the pale small flower at the edge of the path, does what the great gifts of the world cannot do. It is given by someone who had nothing else to give. The young monk returned to the garden the next morning, and he found the old master standing where he had left him, as if he had not moved, and the master said, "Did you place the flower?" "Yes, master." "And when you placed it, did the temple tremble?" "No, master." The temple did not tremble. Did the day cry out in gratitude? And did the world turn to praise you? No, master. The day was silent. The world did not turn. And yet, the old master said, gently, "You placed it, did you not?" "I placed it," the young monk said. And the old master looked at him with the long, slow warmth of old teachings. And he said the words that this story has carried across the centuries. The temple never needed another offering of gold. It is carried by the small acts of the faithful, stacked one upon another, worn hollow together like the stone of the floor. But you needed to give something that no one would count. Because the gift that is given knowing no one will count it, no one will record it, no one will repay it, is the gift that teaches the giver the truth of gratitude, that we do not give to be counted. We give because the heart, when it is full, overflows. And an overflowing heart does not ask whether what it pours is large. It only asks whether it can pour. The young monk stood in the garden, and something in him settled, the way the dust settles after a long wind. He had wanted his gift to be counted. He had wanted his smallness to glitter in the accounts. And the master had shown him, with a flower and a night of silence, that the gifts that are the truest are the ones that are exactly the opposite, the ones no one counts, no one records, no one repays. The secret, enormous, ordinary gifts that together hold the whole world up. Now let this story sit with you, because it is about the smallness you have been dismissing. Somewhere inside you, there may be a ledger, the same ledger the young monk carried, and in it you keep the running account of whether your life has mattered. The great things are in it, glowing. The large donations, the public successes, the moments when the whole world could see. But the small things, the kind word in the hallway, the 10 minutes of your attention, the meal you made that no one thanked you for, the patience you gave when you were tired, the flower you placed when no one was watching. Those, you have been written out of the ledger because they seem too small to count. But look at the flower. Look at the stone of the floor, worn smooth by 10,000 small footsteps. Look at the winter that is survived every year by the sum of 100 million small kindnesses, none of which made the news. The world is not held up by the great gifts. The world is held up by the small ones, stacked one upon another. The way the stone of the temple floor holds the weight of every pilgrim who ever climbed to the altar. Your small acts are not small. They are the grain of the stone. And the stone, over a lifetime, wears the path that the great acts walk upon. Tonight, the teaching of the flower asks you to reconsider your ledger. Take one small thing you did today, something no one thanked you for, something so small it never even entered your accounting, and let yourself see it with the eyes of the monk kneeling in the temple, not as nothing, as one more grain in the stone, one more flower on the altar, one more small and unrecorded act that is, in the true arithmetic of this tradition, exactly the size that grace is. And let the gratitude of this story change something in you, the way you give. Not so that you give more, but so that you stop weighing your giving while you do it. The grateful heart does not ask, was it enough? The grateful heart asks, was it offered? And when the answer is yes, when the flower is on the altar, however pale, however small, however unrecorded, the temple of a life is being built, one grain at a time, by the only hands that could have laid it, your own. There is a fourth story, and it is the deepest of the four, and it is about a widow, a traveler, and the last thing she had in the world. It is told in many lands. In some tellings the woman is a grandmother, in some a beggar, in some a widow. But the shape of the story is always the same, and the shape of the story is this: she had nothing, and she gave it, and the giving of what she had nothing to spare was worth more than the gold of the king. The widow lived at the edge of a village that was not a rich village, in a house that was not a rich house, barely a house, more a shelter of mud and straw and the accumulated patience of the poor. She had been a wife and a mother, and the war, or the sickness, or the long, slow work of fate, the tellings differ, had taken her husband, and had taken her son, and had left her, in her old age, with nothing in the world except one thing that the tellings are careful to name: a small pot. And in the pot, the last of her grain. It was not much. If the story had to weigh it, it would have been a few handfuls, coarse, old, hard-won grain, the final harvest of a life of harvests. It was everything she had, and everyone knew it, and no one in the village would have blamed her for hoarding it against the cold of the coming winter, because that is what the poor do, and it is what they must do. They guard the small against the large, the meager against the hunger that is always just ahead. Then, in the last days of that autumn, a traveler came to the village. The tellings describe him variously: a pilgrim, a monk, a wandering teacher, a man in the robes of the old way, walking the road the teachers walk, with a bowl and a staff and nothing else. He came into the village as the light was failing, at the hour when the poor count what they have left, and he went from door to door, as the old teachers went, holding out his bowl in silence, which is the way of those who ask. At the first doors, there was nothing. The village was poor, and the hour was late, and the fires were small. The traveler moved on, and his bowl stayed empty, and the darkness deepened around him. And the last door he came to, at the very edge of the village, where the road runs out into the fields, was the door of the widow's shelter. She heard the knock. She opened the door, and she saw the traveler standing in the cold with his empty bowl, and she saw what the village had seen all evening: the worn robe, the tired eyes, the long road. And she looked, as the poor look, at what she had left: the small pot, the last of her grain. Now, the tellings are careful here, because this is the turning of the story, and they want you to see it slowly. The widow did not hesitate because she was generous. She hesitated because she was human, and the grain was all she had, and the winter was coming, and the poor know the arithmetic of the winter better than anyone in the world. Every grain in a poor woman's house is a promise against the cold. To empty the pot was to hand the winter a gift of her own thinness, and her old bones knew it. But the traveler stood in the doorway, and the wind came around the corner of the house, and something in the widow, something older than arithmetic, older than fear, older than the careful counting of the poor, moved in her chest. She went to the fire. She took the pot. She poured the last of the grain into the pot, and she cooked it, slowly, with water and salt and the care of a woman who had spent her whole life making little into enough. And when it was done, she carried the pot to the door, and she filled the traveler's bowl, the last of her grain, the last of her season, the last thing she had in the world, and she held it out to him with both hands, the way the very poor hold out the only gift they can make. "Eat," she said. "It is warm. Eat it now before the cold." The traveler looked at the bowl. He looked at her, at the thinness, at the shelter, at the age, at the face that had given him everything and had nothing left for the winter. And the tellings say that. The traveler did not eat. He looked at the bowl, and he did what travelers in such stories do only at the deepest moments. He bowed, and he said, quietly, "You have given me more than food. You have given me the thing I came looking for. I have walked through a country of full houses and warm tables, and at every door I found givers, men who gave from their surplus, women who gave from their plenty, farmers who gave from their full barns, and all of it was good, and all of it was food. But I did not find, until this door, what the long road was really carrying me toward, a gift given from nothing, a pot emptied for a stranger, a winter risked for one bowl of warmth. You have given me the last of your grain, and you have given me, in doing it, the whole teaching of this tradition in a single act. The widow stood in the door, and she did not understand the words, but she understood the warmth, which was the only language she had ever needed. The traveler ate. She watched him eat, and the simple watching of a hungry person being fed was, she discovered, as filling as the food itself. And when he was done, the traveler set the bowl down, and he reached into his robe, and he took out a small coin, one coin, the modest coin of a wandering man, and he held it out to her. "Take this," he said. "It is not much. It is what I have, but it is the only thing I have to give you in return for what you gave me." The widow looked at the coin, and here the tellings divide, because some say she took it, and some say she refused it, and both endings have carried the story down the centuries, because both are true. In the telling that says she refused it, the widow said, "I did not give you the grain to receive a coin. I gave you the grain because the door was open and the traveler was cold and the fire was lit. You owe me nothing. The gift is complete. Do not uncomplete it by turning it into a trade." In the telling that says she took it, the widow took the small coin and held it in her worn hand, and she discovered that it was heavier than any coin she had held in her life, not because of the metal, but because of what it had traveled through. It had come from a cold road, carried in the robe of a man who had nothing, offered from the same empty hand that had received her gift. And she understood, holding it, that the coin was not payment. It was the traveler's version of her grain, all he had, given to her, the way she had given all she had to him. And to refuse it would have been to close the very door she had just opened. In both endings, the widow's winter was different from the ones before it. The tellings are careful about this, too. They do not say the widow became rich. They do not say the grain came back doubled, or that a miracle filled the pot, or that the small coin grew in her hands like seed. They say something stranger and more faithful to the old way. The widow was cold that winter, and she was thin, and she was sometimes hungry, and yet, and this is the whole of it, she was not poor. Not poor, because poverty, the old teaching runs, is not the state of having little. Poverty is the state of being held by the fear of having little. And the widow had done something that autumn evening that broke the grip of that fear forever. She had looked at the last of her grain, and she had risked it on an open door, and the world, in the shape of a cold traveler, had seemed to say back to her, through a filled bowl, through a warm fire, through a bending back, through the plain human fact of a gift received, "You are not alone." Her pot was empty, but her door was open. And the difference between a life lived with an empty pot and a closed door, and a life lived with an empty pot and an open door, is the difference between poverty and peace. Now let this story sit with you, because it is the hardest of the four, and it comes last because it asks the most. You have probably told yourself, at one time or another, that you cannot afford to be generous, that you give what you can, but you have too little. Too little money, too little time, too little energy, too little patience, to give the way the great givers give. And you have held back, not because you are unkind, but because you are human, and the winter was coming, and you were counting your grain. The grandmother in the village counted her grain too. She counted it every evening. But on the one evening that mattered most, she did something that the counting could never do. She trusted the open door more than the closed pot. And the old teaching of this tradition says that the gift that is given from our abundance feeds other bodies, but the gift that is given from our thinness feeds something else. It feeds the giver's own soul, It feeds the faith that the world can hold us. It feeds the deep, quiet certainty that we are not alone, and that our lives are connected, grain to grain, to the lives of the strangers at our doors. You can give from your thinness tonight. Not your money, necessarily. Your attention, your time, your patience, your listening. The last of your energy at the end of a hard day, poured out for the person in your life who needed it, held out the way the widow held out the bowl, with both hands, with the whole of what you had. And the teaching of the story is that you will receive back something the arithmetic cannot measure. Not wealth, not repayment, but something heavier than coin in the hand, the discovery that you are not poor, that the fear of having little was holding you tighter than the cold ever could, that an open door, even with an empty pot, is a life of abundance, because everything that matters enters through an open door, and everything that matters is lost through a closed one. The widow had nothing. She gave it, and the story carries her name down the centuries, not because she became rich, but because she became brave, which is what the very poor become when they finally trust the world enough to give it everything they have. For stories tonight, the woodcutter and the treasure he gave away, the king and the wooden cup he finally learned to hold, the monk and the flower no one counted, and the widow and the last meal she risked on an open door. And they are all the same story told 4 times. Because gratitude is not a feeling. It is a door. And when it opens, the abundance that has been waiting outside your whole life, the abundance of what you already have, of what you can receive, of what your smallness is secretly building, of what trusting the world at your thinnest moment will bring, comes in, at last, and fills the rooms the measuring heart had kept empty. And so, tonight, we have walked with a woodcutter who found a treasure and gave it away, discovering in his empty hands the one thing no one could take from him. We have sat with a king who could give but could not receive, until a wooden cup opened the door he had kept locked his whole life. We have stood in a temple with a young monk who placed a single flower on a great altar and learned that the world is held up by the unrecorded smallnesses of the faithful. And we have shared the last meal of a poor widow who emptied her pot for a stranger and discovered that she was not poor. For stories, one quiet thread running through them like a silver line through dark water. The treasure in the box was not coins. The gift at the roadside was not the cup. The flower on the altar was not the offering. The winter of the widow was not the grain. And gratitude is not the thanks. Gratitude is the eye that finally sees, the hand that finally opens, the door that finally uncloses. It is the oldest medicine of the heart, and it is free, and it is the only abundance that cannot be taken from you. You have more than you think you have. Not more things, more seeing. Look at the room around you once more, with the eyes you have practiced tonight, the woodcutter's eyes, the king's eyes, the monk's eyes, the widow's eyes. Look at the small things, the warm blanket, the still air, the hands that have carried you through every day of your life, the people who have loved you imperfectly and stayed, the night that has held you and will hold you again and has never once asked for payment. Let the practice begin tonight, and let it be small, the way all real things begin. When you wake tomorrow morning, before you reach for anything else, give the day its oldest greeting. Say, in your own heart, in your own voice, the single line that the whole gratitude tradition has been saying in 1,000 languages for 1,000 years. Thank you for this day. I have been given it. I will try to see it. And when the day brings its losses, and it will, because every day brings losses, let the deeper practice hold you. Not the gratitude that thanks only the good, but the gratitude that learns to see. The gratitude that looks at what remains instead of what was lost. The gratitude of the widow, who had nothing and gave it and found that she was not poor. The gratitude of the woodcutter, who had much and kept only the mornings and found them enough. You will forget many times. That is not failure. Gratitude is not a gate you pass through once. It is a road you walk, a road that turns back into the habit of the measuring 100 times a day, and that you reopen gently each time with one small thank you. There is an ancient blessing the teachers of this tradition gave their students when they parted at the end of a long teaching. It is short, and it means, "May you see what you have been given." I will say it to you now in its oldest form, and I will mean it exactly as it was meant. May your eyes learn to count what is present. May your hands learn to open and open and open. May the small gifts of your life no longer feel small. And may the abundance that has been waiting outside your door for years, for your whole life, find you there at last, with your hand on the latch and your heart on the very thing you already hold. Thank you for resting with us. If these stories brought you even a moment of ease, please subscribe. More teachings are always on the way. The contentment you have been searching for has never been somewhere else. It is in the eye that gives thanks, and the eye can be taught. Let it begin tonight. Grows, go gently and see. May you see what you have been given. Rest now. Sleep peacefully. Namaste.